So we're going to continue reading Owen Barfield's The Silver Trumpet, and we're on part two, chapter five. A year slipped by. The young king and queen lived all that time in almost perfect happiness, for there was nothing now to mar their joy except Gamboy's tantrums. And though these were growing more frequent and more violent, yet they gave less trouble than before, because now Courtesy was king and uh, he took the law into his own hands and refused to let her come into the presence unless she would behave herself. Violet agreed to this with great reluctance. She saw that it was necessary, but the coolness between herself and Gamboy was an increasing load of sorrow about her heart, a load which she could still feel in the midst of all her happiness, and of which she longed to rid herself. But what of the silver trumpet? Would not that serve to soften her sister's heart and to bring them together again, at least for an hour? Alas, it was lost. It had never been seen since the night of the wedding. On that night, Queen Violet had asked the king to give it to her to play with. He had refused at first, for when he left home, his father had bidden him never, never to part with it. No, not even to save his life. But when he told Violet this, she only laughed and pouted a little, saying, "Poor sir, you have small faith in our happiness, if you think it hangs on such a toy. Keep your old trumpet." She was merry with her jest and dancing, and meant small harm. Yet Courtesy, who had never heard her speak so before, was troubled inwardly, and felt his heart ache for a moment, as though he were alone. So to ease his little pain, he gave it to her with a forced smile, saying, "Guard it well, then, and at night, um, see you keep it under lock and key." Whereupon she took it and tossed it up like a ball for joy, but that very night left it lying on a couch in the throne hall. And when she woke in the middle of the night and remembered what she had done, she was sorry, but she would not trouble to go and put it away. For it seemed to her that then that nothing would ever make her unhappy again, and that she and the king had no need to be careful of anything. And now nobody knew where it was. Nobody? Yes, one person knew, Princess Gamboy. She had found it in the throne hall early the next morning, and taken and hidden it in an old disused loft above the stables. Princess Gamboy had come to hate and fear the strange power which the trumpet had over her. She was too proud, you see, to surrender to anything except her own self-will, and the thought of the new king everlastingly blowing his own trumpet drove her hopping mad. But there were the five musicians with their five fiddles. Why could not they be brought in to make life more smooth at the castle? Surely the king had not forgotten that wonderful moonlit evening in the west corner of the Queen's garden. No, he had not forgotten it, but how sad it is to tell, all was not well in the land over which King Courtesy ruled. Last year's harvest had failed, and his subjects were growing very poor. There would have been a famine in the cold winter, and all the little children would have starved or frozen to death if the king had not sent abroad to the neighboring countries to buy grain and fuel for his subjects. But the rich merchants of the neighboring countries would not yield up their grain and their coal except for money. Consequently, the king's treasury grew emptier and emptier. The musicians had to be dismissed, and the king and queen, although they lived in a great castle, were very, very poor. In the evenings, while King Courtesy was racking his brains for ways and means to relieve their distress, the queen would sit by the fire, such a small one, mending up his old socks and turning his old clothes inside out to make them look like new. And this was a great hardship to the king, who until that year had always been given a new pair of socks every day. For the hardest of all trials in this world is to have to do without something you have been accustomed to all your life. And just at first, I believe it was very nearly as hard for the king to do without his socks as it was for the poor people to do without their fires. But he knew all the same that fires were very much more important than new socks. So he said nothing about it to anyone. Yet, even this was not the saddest part of the story. For the people, in spite of all the king's efforts to help them, in spite of his empty treasury and his tired, white face, began to growl and complain, and even to threaten. They had never had a famine before, they said, and they had never had a king courtesy before. Therefore, one must be because of the other. Moreover, there were many ill-natured people going about the land, who stirred up and increased his hatred as much as they could. And in particular, there was one woman whose fame soon spread abroad, because in that country it was not usual for women to get up and address a crowd. Citizens, she would cry, standing on a tub in the marketplace. Fellow citizens, I've had enough of this. What happened last night? What will happen again tonight? And she would pause, as though waiting for a reply. And then, as there was none, she would reply to herself, why this will happen. Why this will happen. Some of us will be cold. Some of us will be frozen. All of us will be hungry. And from the crowd of listeners would come a loud growl of assent. And then she would raise one accusing arm and sweep it round in the direction of Mountain Castle, with its rows of blazing windows. Are the people in there cold? Are they hungry? She would ask fiercely, and the crowd would raise its voice as one man and thunder out an indignant no, till the marketplace rang again with a noise. And then, when she had finished her speech, the people would gather into knots and talk in low voices, threatening to march up to the castle and drag the king from his bed and kill him, while all the time, if they had only known, the poor man sat shivering in his fireless study, signing papers, interviewing farmers, and devising schemes for the distribution of food and fuel to his subjects. But in the end, they always decided to stay at home, for however much in their ignorance they had begun to hate King Courtesy, they still loved Queen Violet far too well. They had all loved her devotedly ever since she was a child. So for the present, the king and queen were safe. One night, the queen lay in bed very ill, and beside her in the bed lay a tiny little daughter, 2 days old. The physicians had spoken gravely to the king, telling him that the young queen mother must be kept absolutely quiet for a long time, as the slightest shock might now cause her death. Her death? The poor king was distracted with anxiety, but his counselors told him that he must not allow it to appear in his face. He must not allow it to appear in his face, as the people were discontented, that they feared a revolution if it was known that the queen lay in danger. They would be certain, said the counselors, to blame your majesty for it. This made King Courtesy very sorrowful, for he loved his subjects dearly and would have given his life for them. But what could he do? Moreover, said the counselors, your majesty would be wise to order every room in the castle to be lit up tonight, so that the people down in the city and the shepherds far away on the snow-covered hills may see the lights and be persuaded that all is well in Mountain Castle. Then the king gave orders accordingly, and the lights blazed forth from the windows into the dark night. But down in the city, the same wicked woman who had stirred the people up before was speaking again. Look at those lights, she cried, pointing to the castle. Nobody's cold there. Nobody starves there. Big fires blaze all day on the hearth of every room, burning up the coal that might be warming your wives and children. The tables in there are loaded with peacock's breasts, while you are left to starve. And the hungry men shivering in the freezing east wind, their feet wet, numbed by the snow about their boots, did not stop to ask if the woman were speaking the truth. Is it any wonder? Nobody knew who she was or where she lived. Only one night a man had sworn that he saw her disappear into the castle itself. It was strange. Tonight, too, she seemed to make off in that direction. She has gone to set fire to the castle, suggested a young man in fun. She has gone to set fire to the castle, shouted his neighbor. She has gone to set fire to the castle. She has gone to set fire to the castle, cried everybody. And everybody, except the young man who had suggested it, believed that it was true. For people will believe almost anything when people are excited and hungry enough. Stop her, cried one. No, said another. Yes, shouted a third. What about Queen Violet? Cried another. Are we going to let her be burnt alive? No, 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 came the shouts from all sides, and everybody began talking at once at the top of everybody's voice. At last they decided that they would march to the castle in procession with flaring torches to show them the way to rescue Queen Violet when the castle was set on fire. But Princess Gamboy and the king, they said, they would leave to burn to death. Then they thought that a fine big blaze of burning castle would. I'm sorry. Then they thought what a fine big blaze the burning castle would make, and of the red glare that would go up into the sky, and their hearts grew warm within them, as though they had drunk brandy. Half an hour later, the procession started off. Some of the men carried pitchforks and some axes, and their red faces peeped from the black night beneath the glare of the flaring torches. And as they marched, they sang this song. Left, right, no more flour in the sack. Left, right, no more coal on the stack. But we're going to get warm tonight, my boys, before we all come back. Do you see the flames bursting out? Said one. Look how the roof is smoking already, cried his neighbor. But they only thought they had seen these things because they wanted to see them. Ah, said a third, I wonder how the woman got into the castle. It is well guarded, neighbors, very well guarded. And I wonder who she is, said a fourth. They did not know that it was Princess Gamboy herself who had been speaking to them half an hour ago, and who had now gone back into the castle simply because she lived there. You see, as she grew wickeder and wickeder, she had grown more cunning too, and she had taken to disguising herself and going out to try and stir up rebellion against her brother-in-law, the king, whom she hated so much. Many a time she had tried to tell the citizens how Violet lay ill, knowing that this, which was true, would inflame them against the king more than all the lies she could invent. But somehow the words stuck in her throat. She dreaded the outburst of indignation, which would follow, for it would remind her of the great love which the people bore to her sister. Princess Gamboy still loved Violet more than she loved anything else in the world, but that was so little that even her love for Violet had become a kind of hatred. So she said nothing about her when she spoke to the citizens. And then, you see, she didn't want them to attack the castle because she lived in it herself. Besides, she had another plan on foot for satisfying her ugly jealousy of the king and queen. She was hurrying back now to see if it had been successful. She did not know, as she crept into the castle, that the citizens were marching with their torches up the hill. She had heard a low, strange noise like the buzzing of gnats in the distance, and wondered for a moment what it was. It was all. That was all. But if she had listened very carefully, she might have heard low, like the angry murmur of the sea. So she might have heard low, like the angry murmur of the sea, but getting steadily louder and louder. Left, right, left, right. No more flour in the sack. Left, right, left, right. No more coal on the stack. But we're going to get warm tonight, my boys, before we all come back. Okay, something is brewing. I think we're going to stop for a while. Yeah. Have you read the story before? No. Okay.
It's my
Yeah.
first time.
First time. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, what's interesting to me is that uh, there seems to be a connection to me between the lost Silver Trumpet and what's going on. Even though, of course, Gamboy was getting wickeder and wickeder on her own, it seems like. But it's also kind of, I mean, psychologically speaking, when you lose your ability to invite, real beauty into your life, you sort of by default you invite, uh, bad things into your life, whether you like it or not, you know. And kind of made me think of this verse in Thessalonians where I think it's the Apostle Paul who says that I wouldn't be able to quote it verbatim, but he's talking about the one that is withholding up until the one who is withholding evil up until a point. So like there's something in the world, like an influence in the world that's just holding evil at bay up to a certain point, and then he will be taken out of the world. So there seems to be like, I don't know, like invisible guardians maybe, or the Holy Spirit or something that's just, there until it's taken out of the way for some reason, you know. Just made me think of that.
Could it be the church?
It could
Holding
be,
the yeah,
it
holding the
could be
darkness
something.
at bay.
It also made me think of the what Gandalf told Frodo about the guardians of the Shire. Like the Shire, the hobbits were those little people not realizing that there were guardians at their borders and that they were keeping that darkness at bay and those trolls and monsters and but they were living happily and didn't even suspect what was going on at their borders. But
Yeah, and I also think there's like energies within ourself that guard us. Like the silver trumpet is almost a symbol of that, of guarding what is beautiful. And when we don't protect that, when I was listening to the story, I was thinking a wedding at the beginning, everyone's so happy and everyone's in love with each other. And I always feel that way when like I start a new project, like a new creative project. I'm just thrilled. And then it just seems like all these like forms of resistance start to come in. Like, there's suddenly a lack of resources. There's a famine, there's a hateful person that wants to twist that love and get in the way. And so in a lot of ways, personally, I'm reading this book as a metaphor of like the creative life and how, our creativity really does keep a lot of evils at bay.
yeah,
Um, and so how do we maintain that? And this book is really helping me with that. Because I do think resistance is very real.
yep, yep. I have a friend who just shared with me this morning, very interesting observation. He said, if I start my day with like contemplating something beautiful, or whatever it is, it's just anything. If I make a point of not going to the phone, you know, just leave it alone, and really find things that I, love, observing or looking at that really is beautiful. It kind of sets the tone for the whole day. it's almost like a becomes a magnet in my mind, and it kind of attracts good things. But then almost the reverse happens if the first thing is that I do is I forget about that beauty, forget about that, you know, intentionally seeking that beauty. Then something else, somebody cuts me on the road, something else happens. It's just, all these things kind of start rolling downhill almost automatically, and I don't know what's happening. So, and
Yeah,
I could really relate to that. Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Like, even the ideas in this book, I mean, it's a very beautiful story in a lot of ways, and just like recalling to mind these characters, that's a good way to start the day too, or to start like an intention for a project or interacting with other people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Or cook something. I cooked some flapjacks this morning for family, and this
mhm.
I like this exercise. It's just cooking is a way for me to kind of really get grounded, so to say, because I do things with my hands and the smell and you know then everybody coming
Yeah.
and eating. That's really cool. So anyway, so oh, and do you have
They,
any thoughts?
Um, First of all, just apologies that the light's so bad here, but I don't know what to do with the light to improve it.
Oh,
But
no problem, no problem.
just to say, well, I just like enjoy listening to your conversation. Like I enjoy reading your Substacks. You always sort of make things so real and so magical at the same time.
Oh, thank you.
It's a
I appreciate
it's
it.
a real it's a real learning experience for
Yeah.
me. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions, but I haven't got anything particular to say. So if there's a question you want to ask me, just
Yeah, okay.
ask me the question directly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I just enjoy listening to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, when I thought of this reading club, I thought, maybe we can have like an ongoing conversation around a book because it's like the reason I called it the mystical circle, reading circle or something like that, is because I really do believe that when people plunge into a good, meaningful conversation around some topic, I mean, really interesting things start coming up that are healing and helpful, in many ways. So, uh,
yeah, because
Yeah,
the
I pick up
last
on pick
time
up on that. Yeah.
the last time we had a conversation, it started the whole idea of like that seventh day
hmm
idea where we bring what's imperfect to God on the seventh day, and He somehow perfects it, and then we have the resurrection to contemplate on Monday, and the infinite possibilities of God, and that's really kind of changed my week and how I think about that, and that started here with this conversation. And then you kind of kept those ideas developing in your Substack.
yeah, yeah, it's great. So something is brewing in the kingdom. So let's continue. Um, okay, chapter 6.
Just before you start, one thing that struck me is there's so much humor in this book, and there's a spiritual quality to humor as well. And I don't know if in America they have that phrase of blow your own trumpets.
Well, I've heard it.
Mm.
Maybe I read it somewhere in British literature. So,
Yeah. So in this book, you just read out, you read out that line which has I can't remember the words, but something about
but
blowing his
she
own
she didn't
trumpet.
want she didn't want the king to blow his own trumpet all the time, something like that.
That's right. But that's actually very funny if because that is such a well-known phrase. It's mean puffing yourself up. So
Yeah.
it's just so funny. But it's just an example of the humor coming through and the importance of humor to the Inklings as well. So I just wanted to pick up that example in case you hadn't caught it. But that's
Yeah.
a great piece there.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. There's so much humor that your grandfather put into this, and especially in Little Fat Podger's lines. I mean, it's like someone should really compose an anthology of the all of those phrases and just kind of point out the meaning and how it creates the humorous effect, because that's would be really curious of yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and the poem, like the song that they're singing about no coal in the stack. It's almost like this very childlike little song, but it's about really serious things like famine
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
burning a castle down.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so okay, chapter 6. But what had been happening inside the castle all the time Gamboy was making her speech, and the citizens were preparing to march? For many days past, the little fat podger had been striving hard to lighten the king's load of sorrow by jesting and dancing before him in the most ludicrous manner he could devise. Since courtesy was now king, it was the dwarf's duty as curator of the royal dump. Now I mean, this is probably another one of those, phrases. I'm not sure because I can't really feel in English what kind of effect it produces, but I can sort of feel intuitively it should be funny, the curator of the
Well,
royal dump.
a dump is like a loo, a toilet.
Oh, yeah, oh, okay, okay. I was thinking more like a pit,
oh, how
something like
funny.
that. Okay, good. Curator of the royal
I
dump.
didn't know
Okay.
that.
Yeah. Okay, to try to make him laugh, for his official task was to cure the king's megrims. But as he loved his new master even more than his old one, he could not bear to see him unhappy. He tried all the harder to do his duty well, but it was very uphill work. Now the dwarf had a little workshop right at the top of a high round turret, and there he made all his own clothes and furniture. For no tailor would make a suit of clothes small enough for the little fat podger, and no carpenter could make a tiny enough washstand. So he made them all himself, but he was so neat and tricksy with his fingers that he could make all sorts of things beside ordinary clothes and furniture. In addition to the little red suits of clothes which he wore every day, he used to make wonderful costumes and machines to dance in. He had cloth-covered wood frameworks, some of which were like birds, some like fish, and some like the different animals. But one in particular, all covered over with green. Uh, is this right one? Yeah, covered over with green, with a wonderful attachment of wooden laths and steel springs, which was like a grasshopper. He would get into this framework, and with the help of the wooden laths and steel springs, which were covered to look like a grasshopper's legs, he would perform the most ridiculous jigs that you ever saw. In happier days, King Courtesy had been known to fall down weeping with laughter at the mere sight of it, but of late he had watched the dwarf executing his wild uh, fangada, fandagos, and had not even smiled. He was very unhappy indeed. The poor dwarf did not know what to do, and when he saw that the king took no notice of him, he began to pine and mope. Everybody always laughed at him, but the only people he really liked to laugh were Courtesy and Violet's father and mother, who were getting too old now to laugh very much. He could eat no food and spent most of his day sitting in his little workshop, staring idly at his tools, and with the tears trickling down his coat. Alas, this went on for a whole month, and the little fat podger grew so thin that he ought to have been called the little thin podger. But one evening he was looking vacantly out the window when he saw the king pacing up and down the garden underneath. Suddenly he stopped in his walk and burst out laughing. The little fat podger could not believe his eyes. He craned out of the window to see what it could be that had made his gloomy master smile. And what was his surprise to see that it was nothing more than a clumsy great green toad, which had lolloped into the middle of the garden path and sat there looking at the king without taking the slightest trouble to get out of the way. The dwarf stood at the window looking out at the king, and the king stood in the garden looking at the toad. The king laughed. The dwarf gaped. There they stood, stock still, till the toad gathered itself together and fumbled heavily to the side of the path. Lollopy-lump, 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 went the toad. The king went on his way. Up jumped the dwarf and flew to his bench. Off came his coat, and in 2 minutes he was working furiously, surrounded by the greatest putter that was ever seen. Tools of every shape and size, gold paint, green paint, black paint, varnish, lathes, steel springs, elastic bands, glass eyes, electric bulbs, cranks, pulleys, and the insides of 7 clockwork engines. Never say die till you're dead, he whistled as he planed away at one of the best and smoothest of his stock of lathes. And the plane was so sharp, and the wood was so soft and firm that it was like paring a slab of cheese. He worked on without stopping for 2 days and nights, and all that time he ate nothing but bananas. That's funny. Every half hour he would pause for a minute to eat a banana, so that by the end of the second day he had eaten 96 bananas, but he wasn't ill. And on the evening of the second day, there in the corner of his workshop, striped with glossy black and green and gold, and shining new with varnish, stood a beautiful mechanical toad, 10 times larger than life. All 4 legs could be worked from the inside by springs, and the eyes were 2 bulging bulbs, which could be lit by means of a little electric switch inside the body. It was lovely. The little fat podger ate 4 more bananas and drank a glass of port. Then he jumped in and began to lollop down the winding stair to look for the king and make him laugh. Lollopy-lump, lollopy-lump, lollopy-lump. On the way, he passed a scullery maid, and she screamed and ran away in fright. But the little fat podger didn't hear this because he was because in his hurry he had forgotten to make ear holes in his machine. Now this was the very afternoon of the day on which Princess Gamboy went down into the city, all of which you have already heard about. What you haven't heard is that just as she was starting out, she had met the dwarf inside his toad, and she wasn't frightened. No, not she. And it was then that she suddenly thought of her plan. It was a very cruel plan. She called the dwarf, but he didn't hear because she had forgotten to make ear holes. So she called again, but still he didn't hear. He just went lolloping on as though nobody was there. And then she ran after him and thumped on the toad's wooden back, calling out, "Little fat podger, little fat podger." This time he could just hear, but he was so muffled up in his machine that he could not tell whose voice it was. "Yes," he shouted. "Will you take this note to Queen Violet for me?" cried Gamboy. "Very well," called the obliging little fellow. "Put it under me." So Princess Gamboy took a piece of paper from her purse, folded it up, and scribbled VR on it, which stood for Violetta Regina, which is Latin for Queen Violet. And she thrust it underneath the machine, and the dwarf took it. But there was nothing written inside the piece of paper. The little fat podger gave up looking for the king, however, and trundled off to Violet's room with a note. The queen was in bed with her tiny little daughter, alone in the dark. She was very pale and thin. When the dwarf knocked on the door, she called out in a weak voice, "Come in." Of course, the dwarf didn't hear this, but he opened the door very gently and went in without waiting for an answer. He knew the queen wouldn't mind. Shut up in his workshop for 2 whole days, he had not heard of the physician's order that Violet was to be kept very quiet. Nor did he know anything about the tiny little daughter, so he opened the door very gently and went in. Far away, down in the city, Princess Gamboy, on her tub, was pointing scornfully to the brilliantly lit castle, and all the citizens were thinking, how happy everybody must be in that castle. I expect there is dancing going on behind those bright windows. How different from all our misery. But now Queen Violet looked from her bed and saw a great green toad coming in at the door, with bulging eyes that shone right across the dark room. And she was very ill, and she raised herself up in bed and uttered one loud scream of terror and fell back dead. But the dwarf didn't hear her scream, because he had forgotten to make ear holes. And he thought to himself, now I'm here, I will try and cheer the queen up a little. So he worked the springs and switched the lights on and off and flopped clumsily up and down the room, chuckling to himself to think how Queen must be laughing, though he couldn't hear it, and how much better she would be for it afterwards. And the little 2-day-old baby in the bed looked on all the time with wide eyes, not knowing at all what was happening, but much too young to feel frightened. But then the dwarf happened to turn the toad's electric eyes in the direction of the bed. They shone full on the queen's pale face. He saw what had happened. Crash! He had jumped through the side of his machine like a circus rider piercing a paper hoop, and was kneeling by the bedside, chafing the queen's hands and imploring her to answer him. But she said nothing. And then the little fat podger began to weep because he had killed his mistress. This was Princess Gamboy's plan, you see. Soon the physicians came in and to see how Queen Violet was. And when they saw what had happened, they sent for the king. But I will not try to tell you what King Courtesy felt when he came into the bedroom. Of course, everybody thought it was the dwarf's fault, and the king at once ordered him to be arrested. But the poor little dwarf didn't care at all what they thought of him. He only wanted so badly to explain to Queen Violet that he hadn't meant to frighten her. Mistress, mistress, he kept saying while they put handcuffs on him and took him away. Oh, mistress, do you understand, don't you? You do understand, don't you? But of course Violet didn't understand because she couldn't hear. And now a noise was heard outside the castle wall. It was the mob of citizens who had at last arrived at the top of the hill. No more flour in the sack, they sang. And they beat upon the castle gate with their pitchforks and axes, crying, let us in, let us in. The king did not know what it was, but when he had listened to them out of the window for a little, he understood, and himself went quietly downstairs and alone across the courtyard to open the gates. As soon as the gate began to creak ajar, the foremost among them made a rush to get in, but when they saw the king, they were abashed and fell back. Yet the people behind still pressed them forward. Where is Queen Violet? They cried. We have come to save her. And then the king began to speak to them, and he spoke in the same funny, polite voice in which he had spoken to Violet when he first met her in the west corner of the Queen's garden. Sirs, he said, I fear your zeal outruns your discretion. Nevertheless, it is now my painful duty to inform you that your kindness arrives too late. The lady is dead. You see, dead. No doubt you have heard this word before. And now, sirs, I perceive animosity in your looks. If anybody would care to fillip me up a little with an axe or a pitchfork, what can I say? I am his king, and therefore entirely at his service. And King Courtesy bared and bowed his neck, waiting for someone of his subjects to come at him and strike off his head. but no one of the crowd made a move. The anger suddenly died out of them when they thought of their beloved queen lying white and cold in her bed in the castle. Gradually they fell back, and one by one slunk away down the hill toward their homes. "Good night, sir," called out the king through his nose. "Oh, good night, I'm sure," and he closed the castle gate. But when he had shut the gate and was alone, his queer manner suddenly changed. His head hung down, his shoulders began to droop, his knees bent beneath him, and he looked like an old man. Yeah, this is a good place. Kind of a natural break, but kind of a sad place to end. But it's interesting that kind of every story seems to have a moment like this. Every good story, at least, that it's like things have been going downhill, and you kind of hope that they're gonna turn back, and then it doesn't. It just hits that low point where everything seems to be falling apart. And uh, and every good story and every good movie that I can think of has that. Just like every life, you seem to, you know, uh, kind of a pattern, archetypal almost, like Christ's journey in the flesh, and then coming to basically to Saturday, to Friday, where he's crucified, and then Saturday is the saddest moment, saddest day basically of the week. Strangely enough, it's the day of Saturn, the planet that in the medieval cosmos symbolized death and dying and heaviness, basically. Which makes me think of the disciples who were like so so sorrowful on Saturday. They didn't know what to do with their lives. They didn't know Sunday was coming. But anyway, uh, I remember translating this part, and it gave me shivers because um, because you have to find words to express that, to express the feelings, and kind of made the experience all the more electrifying. Kind of thing. You have any thoughts?
Yeah. Thanks for your reading. Um, just a few just a few things, maybe in the order that I thought them. So you asked the question, the dump, the royal dump. There, I think he's referring to the royal mood, as in down in the dumps. I'm not sure
Yeah,
if you know that
yeah, I
phrase.
do.
So
I do.
down in the dumps. So, it's about the royal mood. But it is, you were right, because you were saying, is that a joke? Is there a double entendre there? And there is, because the dump is also the the toilet. So, it's both
Yeah,
the royal mood and the royal toilet at the same time. So
yeah.
that's where that joke was. But then he was eating all these bananas, and grandfather was a great banana eater. So much so that everybody, when bananas were rationed during the war, so he wrote this book before, obviously in 1923 he wrote this book, but grandfather ate bananas so much that everybody who had a ration of bananas, they all gave their portion of the ration to grandfather. So he was
Ah.
he, I mean, he didn't eat a lot. He was a very thin man. He was not a gluttonous man, but he was a bit like this. He just ate bananas. So, that's a bit of a self-reference there. He recognized that in himself. I was
Yeah.
just I was just wondering about ports. I don't know if you know port or if you drink it in America. Is it known?
Is it like port wine, something like this?
Yeah, port,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
probably like this. Uh-huh. I've heard of it.
Yeah. But that's port and sherry. Well, that's what grandfather drank as well. I mean, I drink that as well. They're my favorite drinks. So,
Mhm.
so when I'm
Mhm.
reading that, he's just having a glass of port. Well, that's the kind of thing I do too, but I don't know how familiar it is to readers in America to just be drinking port, but I've always got a bottle of port or
Uh-huh.
sherry.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard of the stuff that in Russia it's called port wine, or something like this. Portvein, I would say. It's I think it's similar to port, I guess.
It
Uh,
probably is, yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
uh,
But
yeah.
it's a very English drink, so it's drunk in England more than anywhere. So the export of port goes to England.
Mm,
So
mhm.
they drink. It comes from Portugal. It comes from Portugal,
Oh, okay.
but it's an English drink. So the Portuguese have this is historic over centuries. So
Hmm.
there's a big tradition of exporting port to Britain. Same with
Hmm.
sherry.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good to know. Good to know.
And sherry is the Spanish equivalent. So port is from they're very similar drinks, but port is from Portugal and sherry is from Spain. But
Hmm.
the market was always England, so it's an English drink.
Hmm.
And then my last thing is some people, well, like the Spanish translator, you were talking about translating it. When this was translated into Spanish, the Spanish translator, she said, she loved the story, but she didn't know if she would feel comfortable reading it to her children or grandchildren. She's talking
Mm.
about her grandchildren. To what extent is this a story for children? And of course, Tolkien read it to his children, and they liked it because it has got the challenging moments and the bad characters and the badness in it. They liked the badness in it. But
Mm.
where do children fit in this story? Um, is what am I? Because it's a sad thing, as a parent, would how would you deal with it? And because I received that comment from the translators saying she
Yeah.
felt uncomfortable.
Well, I read it in my translation to my niece, who was born in the US, but she's fluent in Russian. So, and she was riveted the whole time. And when I got to this sad part, I just told her, we're in the middle of the book. So when I say she's dead, don't think it's final. We'll see what happens because there's so much magic. And where there's magic, there's always surprise. You know? So, and she was like, okay. And she swallowed it right away. And she said, okay, keep going.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, that's very good.
yeah.
Do you have kids, Jenny?
Yes, three. Yes, a daughter 24, son 20, and another son 16, going to be 17 in April.
So have they read this? Have they read this?
I've read it to them. Well, my daughter read it in English. English. Even 10 years ago, she was fluent. So she enjoyed it very much. Uh, yeah. So, but it's as far as the style, I mean, I'd like to comment on the style. Uh, Stylistically, I've not really. I mean, some British authors come very close to this stylistically, but not to this extent, not to this degree, because it's a really interesting mix of grotesque, very like he will. Uh, I mean, Owen Barfield. He will speak in a way that is at the same time really funny for the most part. But then he will almost unexpectedly, almost suddenly switch to something very grave. So this he creates kind of gaps almost in between something really light and something very grave and profound, you know. And he mixes and weaves those two. So you don't really know what you're reading, whether you're reading like a child story, like Mother Goose type of thing, blah blah blah. And then all of a sudden he drops this bomb of like something grotesque, very huge, like out of the mouth of Little Fat Podger. Every once in a while he would drop something like, okay, this is like the dominant seventh. Oh, and then he throws you for a loop. What does dominant seventh have to do with this whole thing? So the little fat podger would be giving like a tirade, like a huge sentence full of strange words that are funny, and all of a sudden there's this final chord, so to say, in dominant seventh, which kind of makes you stumble. and start to think about what is this? What were you just saying? Harmony, blah 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 blah, and then so this is an interesting way of weaving the story. And I think he keeps, to this. He maintains this style to the end, even to the resolution of the plot, is really kind of funny to me. But we'll get to that later. So stylistically, it's very interesting. I don't know if I mean, if you remember him even speaking that way, it'd be really interesting if he, in a casual conversation, was he like that? Funny, 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 and then drop something really heavy?
I think it would be the other way round. Yeah, it's what you described, but the other way around. So he's having a normal, our conversations are I prefer serious conversations. I don't like jokey conversations. But he would be serious, and then he would be able to drop, humor
Oh, okay.
masterfully. I wish I could do that.
Okay.
But I learned, I could see how he could do it. So it's what you were describing, but the other way around. He's serious and then he drops humor or ups humor, like maybe
Yeah, yeah,
an
yeah.
uptick for the humor. But yes, the humor was there, and I think he missed that from Lewis because they both had that same sense of humor or both understood the jokes. So it could be quite sophisticated levels of
Interesting.
you know play on words and things like that.
Yeah. What do you think he liked the most about Lewis? If you can put it in a nutshell, it's a big question, of course.
Yeah, there's this word which is called entelechy, I think, and I think it's when two things come together and they kind of the they grow, so when they come together they're allowed to grow, so they formed an entelechy between them. I think grandfather
Mm.
says this himself about Lewis, that when they were together this is what they formed, so they
So
were
it's
stronger
basically they
together.
would be kind of discussing something so much that it would kind of grow and grow and pull them together, and they would be like sort of in this third thing, which was like no.
I don't think it's so much that it's that they each fed off each other so that they were then made more. Each
Okay.
one could grow more in themselves because they had been with the other. So it's
Yeah.
not a union of two together creating a third. It's that the way they grew
Hmm.
themselves is by being with the other so that they could then have a bigger perspective or a bigger understanding, and that allowed them
Hmm.
to expand themselves, as it were.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, okay.
I just had another thought as well as we were talking, which um, I'm going to have to correct this book. As I said, there might be some corrections. I said that when we very first started, but one of them is that grandfather wrote this book in 1923,
Mm.
and Lewis read it as a draft manuscript. He read it when he was visiting in London, and he loved the story. But it's 1923. That's so early. They were so young, and then 24, 25, both of them, that kind of age. But it's also the same year that grandfather just met Rudolf Steiner.
Oh. Hmm.
And I don't know to what extent you follow Steiner. Are you very familiar with Steiner and
Well,
Steiner's
not too
work?
much, not too much. I have friends who are really into Steiner, and some of what they say are really it really resonates with me. Some of it I don't really get at this point, but a lot of it is really interesting. So,
Yeah. So I never know to what extent to bring in anthroposophy when I'm talking about grandfather, because some people are just put off by it.
hmm
But
hmm
I think you just cannot remove one from the other. Some anthroposophists admire him because he's writing anthroposophy without referring directly to Steiner, but the grandfather does refer to Steiner very often,
Yeah,
and
yeah, he
his
does.
whole kind of influences. But just if you think that Steiner was a sort of a master, possibly a higher sort of savant,
Hmm
seer, if you like, and grandfather would have met him in person, so had a direct experience of Steiner, and then he wrote this book. This is the first that he, so because I think Steiner
Oh,
came in the summer, and I think this was written by October, so he must have written it sort of in September time. So he must have had that impression of Steiner. Steiner wanted to speak to grandfather. He said, if that young man wants to speak to me, I'll speak to him. The message was sent back to him, grandfather. But
mm-hmm.
grandfather didn't take up the invitation. He didn't know what, he was starstruck. He didn't know what to say. So he didn't,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he
yeah.
always regretted that.
Oh, I
But
see.
also
So
grandfather's
you
German, very
so
good.
you think that this story could have been influenced by Steiner in some ways?
Well, the thing about grandfather is he always said the same thing time and time again in a different way. He said that himself, and people
Yeah,
have said
yeah,
it. So
yeah.
every book of his is he's saying the same thing. So this is his first book he wrote, first book he published,
Hmm.
and it was the first thing he did after meeting Steiner. And given that every book he's written has been about anthroposophy, this book is about anthroposophy as
Oh,
well.
yes, it is. I see a lot of it there. Yeah. I,
Because it's
I
about the feeling quality, and the feeling quality is that middle space, which is the Christ space as well. And you were mentioning about Christ. You've been making some references there. So I think there is. I think you can't read this book without having an understanding of the Christ place in the book as well.
yeah. Well, I had some reflections. I'm gonna maybe talk a little about it, a little more about it closer to the end of the book. But the reflection is about, pre-courtesy being like first Adam, and the second prince will be like the second Adam, basically the Christ impulse, who the one who recovers the silver trumpet. I believe it's big as an archetypal uh, kind of insight, into Christ's nature. Yeah. But
I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely on the right tracks, and that's what I expect you to say, like
well,
because
yeah,
I know
it's
you're able to say things like that. It's
yeah,
very good. Um, we're talking about Adam Cadmium. Have you heard of this word, Adam Cadmium? The
no.
first Adam. Okay. So it's a known archetype, and the name of that archetype is Adam Cadmium, I think. But just
Yeah,
we should just check that out. Yeah.
sure, sure. Well, thank you guys for joining. Sorry about the mix up in the morning. I'm still struggling with technology. Anyway,
Well, you're
but
way
No
you're
worries.
way ahead of where I am, so no problems with that. And thanks for taking an interest. I mean, it's
yeah.
such an interesting book. It's obviously difficult for you to draw people to what you're doing here, but you've done a lot of work on this book, and I've got your
Hmm.
books
Hmm.
about this book. I've got them on my shelf,
Hmm.
and I really appreciate what you say.
It
It would
does
be
certainly
lovely to
deserves
have.
more attention. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we could work up some sort of lecture or
Oh
put
yeah.
something on a
That'll be
podcast.
absolutely interesting. Yeah, to have some talks about some
Yeah.
some of these
So what
things.
I did a little talk. It was just short on this book, which I'll send you a link to. It's on YouTube. But maybe we could work something up
Oh yeah.
that's
I'm
more
all for it.
that's more
Yeah.
real. Yeah, more real.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also,
Sure.
I should just say that the very first thing that I did when I was literary executor is I went to the University of Leipzig, um, because a young man there was just doing his PhD. He just got his PhD, and his whole PhD was on this book. So he'd
Hmm.
written a whole PhD on this book,
Yeah.
and he was not just a normal PhD candidate. He was a very, very good candidate. So much so that he's still in the academia. He's still at the university. He's still in the English department. So it's
That's very
he's
interesting.
stuck with this theme.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, it's a really, really good idea. Well, thank you guys so much again. And well, I'm gonna
Yeah, yeah.
schedule the
So
next
sorry,
one.
but
Yeah.
I think the reason I'm thinking of him is if you want to talk to somebody, at that level,
Hmm.
then maybe maybe we
Oh
could
yeah,
involve him in some way.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. Any conversation or any insight would be really great. 'Cause,
that would be quite interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna send you the invite for the next one, probably in a month or something like that. I'll remind 1 week before, or something like, around those
Yeah,
lines.
just let me know as soon as you can for the date because
Yeah,
I never know if I...
yeah, I will.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Jolene,
Thank
thanks for
you.
your attention here, Jolene.
Of course, it's been wonderful.
Thank you for joining. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Have a good day.
You too.
Yeah.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye-bye.